What up, YouTube? It's your boy, Adam of Nola. In my previous video, I spent some time going through atheist quotes. So I figured a good parallel to that would be to go through some Christian quotes. Of course, the tenor will probably be a little bit different. We'll see. But I'm pretty much ready to go. I got my dranky drank ready to dive in. Few quick disclaimers here. Unlike the atheist quotes where I pretty much knew pretty well all the names there are some names here that I honestly don't know who they are. I don't know if that matters that much. We're not doing biographies. Of course, some of them are very well known, but what's more important to me is the content of these quotes. I will also mention very quickly that just like with the atheist quotes, some of these may have earlier sources. I'm not sure. I'm just going off of where I found these quotes attributed to on the interweb. So if some of the attributions are a little askew, then my bad. Let me know in the comments that I've screwed up. I'm always willing to be corrected. So let's dive right in, shall we? The first set of quotes I have are from the famous C.S. Lewis. Most of you probably know C.S. Lewis pretty well. He, of course, was a famous author of fiction like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But amongst many Christians, he's much better known as one of the primary apologists of his day. So he had a lot to say on Christianity. So here are some of those quotes. Number one is, Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. The first quibble that I would give with regard to this quote is, I always hear this from Christians about, well, if it's true, or I believe that Christianity is true. But even defining what would supposedly make Christianity true or untrue is always up for some debate. I mean, generally speaking, we can assume that if you want to say that you're Christian, you should probably believe in a God. You should probably believe in a single God, and that single God should be the Christian God. You should probably believe that in some form he sent his son or had a son who came to earth in the name and personage of Jesus. Beyond that, even past those basic maxims, trying to define what is or is not a Christian can get pretty sticky. Now, if we get into something like the Nicene Creed, that gives us a lot more detail about what makes someone a Christian. And a lot of people who follow the Nicene Creed think that that is the definition of Christianity. And if it is for you, that's fine. But understand that that is not a universal view. And despite the fact that the Nicene Creed is used by many large denominations around the world, there is nothing about the Nicene Creed or the people that issued it that gives anyone the authority to say that you are or are not Christian based on whether or not you follow the Nicene Creed. But beyond that, the major annoyance that I would have with this quote is that it's really just a subtle way of sneaking Pascal's wager into the conversation, because that's really what he's talking about. It's the idea that if you don't believe in Christianity and it's false, well, I guess it was never that important. But if it's real, well, that's infinitely important because you're going to burn in hell, dude. I mean, he's not saying that here in this quote, but that's really what's being implied. Often Christians will sneak this implication of threats or divine infinite punishment into places where they're not saying it explicitly. So it doesn't really sound that confrontational. He's not saying, hey, be Christian or you're going to go to hell, dude. But man, it's pretty strongly implied here, because if it is true and you're not believing, then that is of infinite importance. And what do you think he means by infinite importance? You figure that one out. Number two is, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. Now, I had not heard this quote from C.S. Lewis before, and I probably should look this up for a future video because I'm really curious. He did not start as an apologist. He started as an atheist. And I'm really curious as to what part in his life this quote comes from. Because Most people associate him very strongly with being a Christian apologist. And yet, this quote to me does not speak well of Christianity at all. A tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. Think about the number of laws and societal norms that Christians try to shove upon you because they're going to save your immortal soul. Think about all the hatred and bigotry, which is still deeply embedded in our society based on LGBTQIA plus issues. There are still people today that want to see Obergefell overturned. They want to see no gay people ever being allowed to marry. They would like to see no gay people even being allowed to do whatever it is that they want to do with other consenting adults in the privacy of their own home. And they will give you excuses about how they're saving your soul. That doesn't make it any better, and it doesn't make it any less hateful. So this quote right here really should be read anytime a Christian wants to impose their ideas and their will upon you, presumably for the reason of saving you. Yeah, that's a really crappy way to doctor up your hatred and your bigotry. Number 3 from C.S. Lewis is a man can no more diminish God's glory by refusing to worship him than a lunatic can put out the sun by scribbling the word darkness on the walls of his cell. I don't disagree with this quote. If your God is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and just this overall super powerful dude, then what difference does it make if anyone refuses to worship him? But unfortunately, I have to wonder when I read this quote, did C.S. Lewis read the Bible? Did he read the Old Testament? Because God, Yahweh, seems to be intently concerned as to whether or not at least his people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, whether they worship him. He wasn't just stewarding them. He wasn't just saying, hey, these are my people, I hope they're doing well. No, he was demanding worship. He was spelling out the means by which you worship. And he was making sure that everyone else knew that all of this fed into his glory. If you don't believe me, I mean, I could bring up a whole slew of scenarios to point this out, but the best one that comes to mind instantly is just Exodus. He wasn't just freeing the Israelites. He wasn't just bringing them to the promised land. The entire story, he is braying like a jackass, making sure that everyone knows about his glory. And then making sure that through the whole time in the wilderness, that not only were the Israelites worshiping him, but worshiping him blindly. Anytime they had the nerve to even, ask questions or express even the slightest amount of doubt, his response was to kill people, was to put plagues on his own people, was to open the earth and let it swallow his own people. So I don't know how C.S. Lewis justifies this quote in light of the plain text of the Bible itself. The fourth one is also from C.S. Lewis, and then we will get into some other people. But in this one, he says, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. I wanted to highlight this quote because although he doesn't say it explicitly here, this really exposes what I've always thought is a core weakness in the worshiping practices of most Christians, or most theists for that matter, but we're really talking a lot about Christianity here. And the weakness that I'm talking about is this. You can tell me all day that your God is obvious. You can give me all the arguments for how there is no other explanation for the universe being here. You can repeatedly attest to all the great things that God has supposedly done in your life. And yet, most theists that I ever talked to repeatedly rely on the word believe. Well, you might say, what difference does that make? They believe. So of course they say believe. But here's the deal. As C.S. Lewis alludes to, you don't believe in gravity. You don't believe that the sun is out there and that it will rise in the east and set in the west. You don't believe in anything that's truly a factual part of your known universe. You don't say that you're going to believe in gravity. You know gravity is there. And if you have any doubts about that, then let's go walk you off the cliff and see if you're happy to follow along, or if you say, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not walking off the cliff. You won't do that unless you're suicidal, because you don't believe in gravity, or you don't believe that gravity will go away. You know that gravity is there. Now, I know that we can go down rabbit holes in terms of epistemology and how we actually know things, and how you can truly never know something, like we could all be in the Matrix right now. But that's kind of an esoteric discussion for another day. I mean, you have full confidence based on your entire life's experience that gravity, the sun, other natural facts of the known world are there, and they're always going to be there, and you know how they behave. But when you talk about God, who supposedly is self-evident to all of us, you still frequently fall back on this word believe. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using the word believe, but at least have the humility to understand that when you talk about belief, in that language alone, you are betraying the fact that what you're talking about is not a known universal constant. We don't talk about believing in the earth. We don't talk about believing in atoms or believing in the sun rising in the east. We know these things to be true, but when you talk about your God, you frequently fall back on the terminology of belief. Number 5 is from Albert Einstein. It says, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous." Now, you're never going to hear me say too many bad things about Albert Einstein. The dude was one of the most brilliant, amazing scientists who has ever walked this earth. So he was a titan of knowledge and of theoretical capabilities. But that being said, this statement by him, this quote to me, exposes so much wrong with Christianity. I've done other videos on this, but this idea that coincidence is how God talks to you, I am going to be frank with you. I was one of these people. I would look at the coincidences in my life and I'd be like, see, that's God trying to tell you something. No, it's not. It's you trying to read into a situation because God cannot or will not make himself clear. If your omnipotent, all-knowing, all-present God can't be bothered to speak to you in any means other than coincidence, then that really undermines the whole idea that you have anything approaching an omnipotent God in the first place. When I proposed to my wife, I didn't somehow communicate it to her via coincidence. When I've made major decisions about my career or my own life, I have not communicated them to other people via coincidence. If I were going to quit my job tomorrow, I wouldn't tell my boss via some obfuscated manner of coincidence. And yet you think that your omnipotent God is speaking to you through coincidence. Yeah, okay. Number 6 is from Jesus Christ. This really isn't meant to be a Bible study, but I thought this was hilarious, so I had to add it. Jesus Christ tells us, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me." First, I love how he throws that in, like, trust in God and also trust in me. But if you're not a dyed-in-the-wool apologist already, if you're not already a believing Christian, this just comes across as, trust me, bro, I got this one. And of course, I realize as a Christian, you do. And that's okay. But if you take yourself out of that context, I mean, it's really just like me saying, hey, I'm going to make your life better by watching these videos. Trust me. Number 7 comes from John Quincy Adams. He says, "The highest glory of the American Revolution was this. It connected in one indissoluble," that is a very hard word to say, "bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity." I hate this quote because this just feeds into the pervasive crap we have in this country, being the US, where despite the fact that it was founded firmly on this idea of a separation of church and state, the current political atmosphere, especially coming from the political right, is that they want to tell us over and over again that this is really a Christian nation and has always been a Christian nation and was founded on Christian principles. And I do understand that there were people, even going back to the founding fathers, who believed that. There were also founding fathers who were atheists. There were founding fathers who were devoutly religious but wanted a huge separation of church and state because they saw what the English government did in terms of oppressing the religious practices of its own people. But nevertheless, that's never stopped people so far in America from trying to say that this country was a Christian country, is a Christian country, and was founded on Christian principles, and they use that as some type of bludgeon to justify continually cramming Christian ideas into our laws and down our throats. But I also wanted to point this one out because I think it's hilarious. I've heard this quote before from John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was a Bible lover. He really thought that if all of our societies, not just American, were adhering to the Bible and only being run by the Bible, that it would be such a better world. Which, first of all, always makes me think, bro, did you read the Bible? Did you really read it? But on top of that, he was a Unitarian. Now, that doesn't really matter to me, but I know that for most Christians today, especially in the US, they would not even think of him as a Christian because John Quincy Adams did not believe in the Trinity because he was a Unitarian. But that's never going to stop someone from pulling up quotes when they want to use John Quincy Adams as another piece of justification for ramming their religious laws right down your throat. The next quote is from Anne McDowell. She says, "I've been a Christian for a long time, and I think that Christianity gets a bad rap. I think that people's perception of what a Christian is today is something that is closed-minded and narrow, and that's not what I am." I love this quote because it highlights something that I'm going to do future videos on, which is that, of course, Christians in general, all billions of them, are not all closed-minded, narrow-minded, bigoted, etc. What Christianity does have a massive problem with, though, is that they don't have a central governing body. They can't even agree amongst all Christians as to what exactly is a Christian. And because of these things, it's hard for them to even effectively police their own ranks. So on one hand, I agree with Andy McDowell that there's a lot of narrow-minded assholes out there in Christianity that give Christianity a very bad name. Because there are billions of Christians in the world. Of course, there are Christian assholes, just like there are atheist assholes, just like there are Muslim assholes and Hindu assholes. So that's unavoidable to some extent. But what is sad at times is to see that when some public Christian figure shows their ass, there is usually a deafening silence from other Christians in terms of shouting them down and saying, hey, that does not represent our values. So while I agree with Andy's sentiment that Christianity does not have to be closed-minded or bigoted or anything like that, unfortunately, this opinion of Christians proliferates because when someone comes out who's a complete Christian jerk, it's almost impossible to get other Christians to really go on record and say, yeah, this asshole does not represent us. If you don't believe me, let me just give you one example. When the Westboro Baptist bigots were out on the streets with these horrible, hateful signs against gay people, there was very little publicly said by other Christian denominations and other Christian leaders damning the activities of the Westboro Baptist Church. Now, I know you can say, well, we don't have control over them. Like, we can't stop them from picketing like this. But you could at least come out strongly on record and say these hateful assholes are not Christians and should not be associated with Christians. And some of you did. Some denominations actually came out against Westboro Baptist. And I know that one-on-one, when you talk to many Christians, they despise what Westboro Baptist does. That being said, it was very hard to find any kind of official Christian record from any denominations or any churches that said 100%, we are disavowing these people. They do not represent us and they are not Christians. And that is an ongoing problem for Christianity. So the next two quotes I sorted into this order because I think it kind of highlights what I'm talking about here. Number 9 is from Tom Tancredo. He says, the left hates United States sovereignty, capitalism, Christianity, and the freedoms guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. To the left, anything that helps undermine those institutions is an ally, not an enemy. Yeah, what a bunch of ridiculous bullshit that is. Now, I know that he's not just talking about Christians, and he's basically just targeting the left here, but here's what I'm talking about. When I say that any jerk can pick up the banner of Christianity and wave it around, and it's almost impossible to get other Christians to shout him down. When I was growing up, Christianity was not a leftist thing. It was not a rightist thing. It was not a GOP thing. It was not a Democrat thing. Of course, there were some denominations that were more Republican than Democrat and vice versa. Of course, there were communities that were church-going that were more left or more right. But the idea that Christianity alone was the purview of people on the right or the purview of the GOP would have been seen as ridiculous when I was a kid. But now this attitude is pervasive throughout American politics and American society. And I'm not saying it's true, but the problem is that people aren't doing anything, on the most part, to really disavow this whole idea that now Christianity is GOP and Democrats are leftist, atheist haters. And then they are conflating all this stuff about socialism and capitalism and freedoms and Social Security and all this other crap. And they're sorting this into political buckets when this should have never been associated with anything with regard to Christianity or any other religion. And yet they've been able to do this because no one in Christianity, for the most part, is shouting them down. Maybe your family hates this happening, and maybe they talk privately about how this shouldn't happen, but publicly, no one really shouts these people down. That leads into quote number 10 from what a fine woman, Anne Coulter. She says, we should invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity. We weren't punctilious about locating and punishing only Hitler and his top officers. We carpet bombed German cities. We killed civilians. That's war, and this is war. Now, bringing up these quotes from Tom Tancredo and Anne Coulter, I know that the Christians that are watching this are thinking, that has nothing to do with us. Those are not our values. We would not say these things, and that's fine. Then let your voice be heard somewhere where you can shout these people down. Because you know what? I'm tired of hearing this crap from Fox News that's just wrapping themselves in a Christian blanket and saying, look at us, we're righteous and holy. I'm tired of seeing people parading around their politics and assuming that we should automatically associate them with Christianity or with the horrible socialist left. So if you all don't want to be associated with these assholes, let your voice be heard, because some of this stuff is disgusting. This next quote is from Yuval Noah Harari. He says, how do you cause people to believe in an imagined order such as Christianity, democracy, or capitalism? First, you never admit that the order is imagined. Now, I do have some problems with this quote because I don't know if you can really say that capitalism is imagined. It's just an economic system. And there has never been a truly fully capitalist society in the history of the world. Similarly speaking, there has never been a truly democratic society in the history of the world. Everything is shades of this or that. But this idea that Christianity is imagined, I actually take some umbrage with this. Here's why. As an atheist, it's far too easy to assume that everyone who's Christian is lying, and they know they're lying, and they're telling you about their make-believe sky daddy, and they don't care how bad they're lying. But I don't believe that at all. In fact, I think it's incredibly harmful to even imply such things. Most people who are Christians absolutely believe in what they're telling you, deeply in their soul. Part of it is because they're being honest with you about their beliefs, but also it's because their beliefs are not driven by them purposely spreading imagined ideas. Their beliefs have been baked into their brains by indoctrination. I've talked about this in another video. Christianity does not spread by people willingly telling lies to other people to bring them into the club. Christianity spreads, all religion spreads, primarily through indoctrination. I mean, there are people who choose of their own free will to adopt religion or to convert to another form of religion. Statistically speaking, those people are a tiny minority. The vast majority of people who have religious leanings have those leanings because they were raised to be that way, usually from birth. And those indoctrinations, in most cases, have been carried on for millennia. Even if we were to go back to the times of the ancient Hebrews, you might think, well, at some point, some old Hebrew man wrote down these lies in order to propagate this system of control or whatever narrative you want to tack onto it. But the simple fact is, even before the first words of Genesis were ever written down, they existed as stories that were told over campfires and over dinner tables for generations, and in some cases for centuries. So by the time someone first put the words on paper or papyrus or whatever, when they first wrote those words down, they already believed that this is truth. At some point, many thousands of years ago, yeah, someone made something up. But let's not blow this out of proportion and act like Christians or any other theists today are actively out there lying to you to try to pull you over to their side. That's patently ridiculous. How would you like to be one of my advisors? I'm using Skepticus's memberships as a way to allow you to have a voice in the content and the direction of this channel. I hope to see you in the membership pool, and I want to hear your voice in what Skepticus is doing going forward. Number 12 from Frank Borman says, capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. I think that this quote is trying to make a case in favor of hell. Like, hey, you have to have hell there as a way to make Christianity work, just like you need bankruptcy there as a way to make capitalism work. But this analogy is so bad because hell is a one-way ticket to eternal torture. Bankruptcy is not torture. In fact, bankruptcy is basically the opposite. It's a capitalistic convention that allows you to get out from under your debts, usually so that you can start fresh again. Now, I'm not saying that if your business is failing or going through hard times, that it's fun to go through bankruptcy. It usually implies some other failure in your business model, which may also bleed over into your personal life and all sorts of other things. But to go through bankruptcy in the long run is not a bad thing at all. It keeps you from doing what we did centuries ago, which is going to debtor's prison or being sold into slavery or going through some other life change in which this failure will haunt you and your descendants for many years to come. Bankruptcy allows you to wipe the slate clean. It allows you to either gain protections from your creditors or even to get out from under them altogether. That is the exact opposite of hell. When you go to hell, you're not restructuring. You're not getting rid of your debt. When you go to hell, you're paying off your debt for eternity. What does that have to do with bankruptcy? This analogy is deeply flawed. Number 13 is Christianity is the root of all democracy, the highest fact in the rights of men. That's from Novalis. When I saw this, I just thought, what? Where are you getting this from? But I had to put it in the list because Christians have tried to assimilate every good idea of society. They have tried to assimilate science and say we would have no science if it weren't for Christianity. They've tried to assimilate democracy and say we would have no democracy if it weren't for Christianity. I'm pretty sure that most Christians don't think you would have babies or ice cream if it weren't for Christianity. But when we talk about Christianity as the root of all democracy, once again, I have to ask this person, have you read the Bible? Tell me how much democracy exists anywhere in the Bible. Now, I know we can get theoretical about this. You can say, oh, but democracy is this idea of equality, and Jesus preached some things that were roughly kind of sort of about equality, and that's all fine and good. But when your book covers 1,000 or so years of purported human history, and you can't be bothered to show one example of any democratic action in the entire book, don't give me your bullshit about how this is supposedly rooted in Christianity. They have nothing to do with each other. And everyone who wants to say, well, this is a Christian principle, can point to other societies that aren't Christian and come up with the same principles. And if you don't believe me, let's look at quote number 14 from the late, great Jimmy Carter. He said, "We can't equate democracy with Christianity because the largest democracy on earth is India, which is primarily Hindu. And the ones who aren't Hindu are almost all Muslims or Buddhists. The Christian population there is like 2%. He says the third largest democracy is Indonesia, which is Islamic. Democracy and freedom are not dependent on Christian beliefs." And this is coming from Jimmy Carter, who was a devout Christian, but at least he had the good sense to know that you should not be so arrogant as to assume that your religion, Christianity, is somehow necessary or even the birthplace of democracy. That is patently absurd. Number 15 comes from Friedrich Nietzsche. He says, "There are people who want to make men's lives more difficult for no other reason than the chance it provides them afterwards to offer their prescription for alleviating life. Their Christianity, for instance." I love this. I mean, this should probably be in the video about atheist quotes, but this is so beautiful and so true. I mean, the whole idea that we have to start from the premise that you're all sinful, you're all fallen, and you all deserve to go to hell. That's a control mechanism. It's a control mechanism because now, once we've gotten you to believe that you are a dirty, unclean, sinful person who deserves to have eternal conscious torment, now I can ride in on my white horse and say, but look at this. I've got Jeebus for you. And Jeebus is going to set it all right. One of the most insidious control mechanisms is to knock you down so that then I can try to take credit for lifting you back up. Never mind the fact that after I lift you back up, you might still be lower than you were when I found you. But if all you remember is that you were down here and now you're a little higher, suddenly I get all the credit for it. And that is a nasty control mechanism. Number 16 comes from Paulo Coelho. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Paulo says, "The major religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they deny somehow that God has a feminine face. However, if you go to the holy texts, you see there is this feminine presence." I don't know who Paulo is or was, and I don't know what perspective they're trying to bring to this. If we want to talk about the literal idea of why does God, the Christian God, need to be a man, I'm going to do a whole other video on that. But this idea that you can look through the Christian Bible, the holy text, and see this feminine presence is, in my humble opinion, quite a stretch. Now, I'm not saying that women have no importance in the book whatsoever, but I'm saying that the idea that there is this significant feminine presence in the face of God in the Christian holy books is, quite a stretch. Now, of course, part of this idea falls back on what are we calling a feminine presence? I assume we're implying certain stereotypes about what makes someone masculine or feminine, I assume we're saying, well, if you're nurturing, you're feminine, and if you're warlike, you're masculine, or some crap like that, which is always a little specious to begin with. But even under those auspices, there is so much in the Bible itself that feels like toxic masculinity. And for the conservatives out there, I don't care if you don't like that word, but the Bible is just overflowing with toxic masculinity. So I don't know where this idea comes that you can look through the Bible and find all of this feminine presence, but I'd like to believe it. I mean, you can pull out a verse here or there. You can make some insinuations, but bruh, you're stretching. You're stretching really hard. Number 17 comes from Mary Baker Eddy. She says, if Christianity is not scientific and science is not of God, then there is no invariable law and truth becomes an accident. This I just find to be laughable. But I put this quote in here because in these discussions you see online where people are trying to make their cases for God, it baffles me sometimes how for some people, every inherent property of the universe is somehow a proof for God. There's the fine-tuning BS, right? And because we found this constant, that must be God setting the constant. Because we found pi, God must have made pi. Like 3.14 could never have happened without God. Like if 2 plus 2 equals 4, it has to be God making 2 plus 2 equals 4. Because if God weren't there putting the maths together, then 2 plus 2 wouldn't equal 4 every time. Sometimes it would equal -7 or 42. But because God makes 2 plus 2 equal 4, it's always 4. What the hell? The people that write this stuff have no concept of what's called an emergent property or even just basic properties. Why can't some things just be? This idea that the sky has to be blue because God made it blue. And I know you could say, well, we know why it's blue. It's because the angle of refraction of the light as caused as it goes through the atmosphere. But there are still people who will tell you that, but the reason that it registers as blue in our brain is because God made it so. Like every little minute detail has to be attributed to God. And that just feels so small-minded to me. I don't mind that you look around our world and you feel that you see signs of God. That is a philosophical argument to me, and I don't have a problem with it. But the idea that everything, down to the smallest detail, has to somehow come directly from God. I mean, the people who make these arguments will tell you that every aspect of logic comes from God. Like you couldn't make a logical deduction unless God had put those pieces in place. Instead of realizing that some aspects of logic, I would argue all aspects of logic are there because that is the only way this could work. Not because God made it that way, but because this is the way the universe fell out. But according to Christians, many of them, you can't have a single universal truth without that universal truth being stamped with the signature of God. Number 18 is from John Shelby Spong. We'll have another quote here from John as well. But this one says, Christianity is, I believe, about expanded life, heightened consciousness, and achieving a new humanity. It is not about closed minds, supernatural interventions, a fallen creation, guilt, original sin, or divine rescue. I believed this for most of my life. And even to this day, if for some reason I felt like I had to be Christian again, this is the quote that I would live by right here. My Christianity, if you want to call it that at this point, is about expanded life, heightened consciousness, and achieving a new humanity. The problem is that the people who are Christians, by and large, don't agree with this. So you could argue that there is a universal truth of Christianity that is true whether the mass of Christians believe it or not. But to a certain extent, the Christians are a club. And if they tell you it's about guilt original sin, divine rescue, fallen creation, etc., then on some level, it is. So I think that this is somewhat related. Number 19, it's from Francis Spufford. It says, despite the best efforts of apologists like William Lane Craig, the evidence for Christianity's truth is, in truth, not the kind that science will or should ever admit. We believers mean something different by the word, something that puts faith permanently in the category of irreproducible results. Again, I don't disagree with this. Unfortunately, I think that most Christians do. Part of my problem with someone else's faith is that if your faith requires scientific backing, if your faith requires evidence that you can use to prove it to an atheist, then your faith sucks. A perfect example of this that I always bring up is the resurrection itself. If you want to tell me that you can prove the resurrection, you're being an idiot. If you want to tell me that it's the most plausible explanation, it's because you have no idea how evidence works when you're trying to back up the story of a miracle, the likes of which has never been confirmed by any other human on earth. We have no evidence that any person has ever been resurrected by God or anyone else for any reason. And yet you want to tell me that that's the most plausible explanation of Jesus's empty tomb. And to be clear, I don't care if you believe in the resurrection, believe it. But if you believe it, have the cojones to own it as an article of faith, because that's what it is. You cannot prove the resurrection. I cannot disprove it. Nobody on this earth can prove or disprove whether someone born and lived 2,000 years ago was resurrected. Even if we had a body, we couldn't confirm whether it was Jesus's because we don't have his DNA. We don't know what bits of his skeleton might confirm whether it's Jesus. So nobody can prove or disprove the resurrection. And as soon as you get off that high horse and realize that it's an article of faith, the stronger your faith will actually be. The more time you have to spend trying to defend some historical account, whether it's of the resurrection, whether it's of the walls of Jericho, whether it's of the Exodus, that's all the more time that you are not growing spiritually at all. So get over it. Number 20 is from someone whose first name, I guess, is Tullian or Tullian. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I have no idea how to say that. But the quote is this: Christianity affirms that Jesus severed the link between suffering and deserving once and for all on Calvary. God put the ledgers away and settled the accounts. I put this quote in here because I had heard something similar to this when I was sitting in church over and over and over again. I don't know how many sermons I've heard that were similar to this. Often they will invoke the quote that it is finished. Like right there on the cross, everything was finished. Like suffering goes away. Like it's all taken care of. God put the ledgers away. If God put the ledgers away, then how is it that I'm still on the hook for going to hell? Because that really feels like a ledger to me. How can you possibly tell me that you are sending people actively to heaven and or hell, and then also tell me that God put the ledgers away and settled the accounts? That's utterly ridiculous. And suffering is still rampant throughout the world. If I never told you that Jesus existed, if you had no idea what Christianity was, and you just looked around our world and I asked you, is this a divinely inspired place where God is taking care of everything? There is no way that without a cultural influence, you would come in and say that's the case. And yet this is the crap that gets preached on Sundays all over this country every year, year in and year out. Number 21, Josh McDowell says, after I set out to refute Christianity intellectually and couldn't, I came to the conclusion the Bible was true and Jesus Christ was God's son. I've seen other quotes from people like this. And to be clear, if you have sought to refute Christianity and then became Christian, that's great. I'm happy for you. The idea that you can't refute these things, though, does make me wonder, like, how hard were you trying, bro? Because, man, it ain't really that hard. But this also harkens back to an earlier question that I brought up, which is, what are we talking about refuting Christianity? Because I think therein lies the problem for anyone who thinks that they're going to refute anything. I mean, we already know that the Christian God, like basically every God, is an unfalsifiable proposition. God constructs are always designed to be unfalsifiable. You know why that is? Think about it. So if you can't falsify God, you can't falsify the resurrection, as I've just talked about, then how is it that you thought you were going to refute Christianity? I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, as an atheist, I can give you 50 great reasons to not believe in Christianity, but can I absolutely refute it? I mean, refuting implies that I have disproven something, that I have really shown that, dude, this is false. There is no reason you should ever believe this. And of course I can't do that because you have purposely chosen unfalsifiable pretenses. So sure, you couldn't refute it. But just because you can't refute something doesn't mean that it's true. If you don't believe me, then let's talk about worshiping my God, the flying spaghetti monster, because you can't refute that one either. And yet, you still don't think it's true, do you? Number 22 is from Robert H. Schuller. He said, 20th century history of Christianity will name Oral Roberts as the voice that brought the Pentecostal movement to be taken seriously by mainline Christianity. I had to include this, first of all, because it really illustrates how deeply ethnocentric and culturally blind a lot of people can be. That's not just Christians, of course, but man, Christians got some doozies. And I say this because I don't even think that in America, there is this overwhelming sense that the Pentecostal movement is taken seriously by mainline Christianity. In the US, the Pentecostal movement does have more momentum than it probably does in most other parts of the world. But even in the US, there are scores of Christians that find Pentecostals to be outright ridiculous. And if you get outside the US, and I didn't pull up stats on this, I'll probably have to do another video about it at some point in the future. But if you get outside the US, any serious nature that people would give to the Pentecostals falls precipitously. When you get into Europe or other parts of the world, when you get into other Christian communities that aren't stained by the US, they see Pentecostals, generally speaking, as a joke. And that's not me slinging insults, because, you know, I'm atheist. I think a lot of Christianity is a joke. But the point is, that if you think that the Pentecostal movement is taken seriously by mainline Christianity throughout the world, you really have your head shoved way up your backside, because that just isn't true. Number 23 comes from Lee Strobel. He said, Christianity is a very historical religion. It makes specific claims that are open to testing. Oh, Lee. Yes, what are we calling historical? This, to me, is one of the worst aspects of Christianity. I would greatly prefer it if it was, the Bible was a book of Proverbs, a book of rules and wisdom. But Christians absolutely cling to this idea of historicity. And it gets so badly conflated, because these Christians who cling to these ideas don't seem to understand what truly is or is not historical. Just because your book has references to kings who did live or to time periods that actually happened doesn't mean that the book itself is historical. Now, to be clear, I'm not telling you that nothing in the book happened. I'm not telling you it's all some made-up fairy tale. But the idea that there's so much in Christianity that's historical that we can test is pretty damn ridiculous. I've heard this analogy used elsewhere on other channels where we talk about the fact that, well, Spider-Man references actual streets in Manhattan. Does that mean Spider-Man is historical? Of course not. Dan Brown's famous Da Vinci Code novel got so popular in part because it spins in all these true historical details, and then it silently spins in all these other historical details that aren't historical at all. And if you aren't educated and if you aren't thinking about it critically, it's easy to read something like the Da Vinci Code and go, oh my gosh, I never knew all these things. Well, you never knew them because they're not true. It's a fictional narrative, but it feels real. It feels like a conspiracy because he weaves in all these true organizations and true locations. And then if you're not thinking about it critically or in an educated mindset, you walk away from the book thinking, wow, I never knew all that stuff. Well, you never knew it because it's not true. But the idea that Christianity is a very historical religion is such a weak contention. Yes, of course, there are aspects of the Bible that do relate to actual historical people or actual historical events. For example, I have never been a mythicist. I do believe that Jesus walked this earth. There was a governor, a Roman governor called Pontius Pilate. There was a King Herod in Judea, etc., etc. I mean, we can look at all sorts of little facts that are pulled from the time. That doesn't mean that the entire book itself, or even most of it, is historical. It's essentially based in a loose framework of some things that we know to be historical. That's all you can really say about it with any type of intellectual honesty. And the last one that we're going to do today, 24, is from Shane Claiborne. Shane says, the more I have read the Bible and studied the life of Jesus, the more I have become convinced that Christianity spreads best not through force, but through fascination. That's lovely, Shane. Unfortunately, it doesn't really have much basis in reality. I'm not saying that Christianity spreads through force, although it depends on how we want to define force. Most of Christianity has never spread. Most religions never spread at the point of a sword or at the end of a gun. Most religions spread to the extent that they ever spread through indoctrination, which is kind of a form of force, but it's not really the same thing. You are raised to believe a certain religion. There are, of course, people who follow a religion that they were not raised in, but statistically speaking, those people are rare. There's a reason why if your parents were Christian, you're almost certainly Christian yourself. If your parents were Muslim, you're almost certainly Muslim yourself. There are so few people that are raised Christian and become Hindu or raised Buddhist and become Muslim, etc., etc. There's a reason for that. It's called indoctrination. Now, whether or not that's force, that's a bit of interpretation. I mean, on one hand, these kids don't really have much opportunity to stretch their minds and come up with new ideas theologically. These ideas are pretty much forced on them. You can argue that by the time they get to be 18, 19, 20 years old, in theory, they kind of sort of have the freedom to make their own religious choices. But come on, man, that's not human nature. Sure, you could break away from your family and pick a new religion, and some people do, but that's so rare. Because even after you're out of the house, you probably have all these social ties. You have this shame if you were to leave the traditions in which you were raised. So indoctrination is massive and it's real. And whether or not that's force is a different question, but it's usually anything but fascination. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed these quotes. We'll do more in the future. These aren't all the videos I'm going to do. I'm going to get off the quotes for a little while. But since I did the atheist quotes before, I thought it would be good to go through some of these Christian quotes today. Christian quotes, Christian quotes. Some of these things are really fun to say after you've done an hour of talking. But I hope that you've enjoyed the video. I hope that you join us for many more. Thank you for being here. If I've said anything wrong, anything incorrect, if I have blasphemed in any way, dude, Jesus, Holy Spirit, Yahweh. Yeah, I got nothing. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you on future videos. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.